2020 presumptive Democratic nominee Joe Biden, he is now apologizing tonight after what he said about black voters. Mary Bruce has that story.
Tonight, Joe Biden is doing damage control after he sparked outrage with this message for black voters.
If you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, and you ain't black.
It don't have nothing to do with Trump. It has to do with the fact I want something for my community. I would love to see.
Take a look at my record, man.
The reaction swift and furious. This from the Senate's only black Republican.
That is the most arrogant, condescending comment I've heard in a very long time. 1.3 million African Americans voted for Trump. He's saying to 1.3 million African Americans that you're not black?
The Trump campaign piled on, saying Biden truly believes that he, a 77-year-old white man, should dictate how black people should behave. Biden today doing cleanup.
The bottom line of all this is perhaps I was much too cavalier. I know that the comments have come off like I was taking the African American vote for granted, but nothing could be further from the truth. And I shouldn't have been such a wise guy.
His campaign notes Trump has a long history of racially charged comments. Sources say Trump has used expletives to describe African nations. He told 4 congresswomen of color to go back to the countries they came from. And he perpetuated the false theory that Barack Obama was not born in America.
And for more reaction now to Biden's comments today, we bring in Republican Senator Tim Scott from South Carolina. Thanks so much for joining us, Senator.
Thank you, Lindsay. It's good to be with you.
So, Senator Scott, you said today that Biden's comments were arrogant and condescending. We heard that just in Mary Bruce's piece. And you also pointed out that more than 1 million voters, black voters, voted for Trump in 2016. Do you think that Biden's words today will move more black voters into the Trump camp for 2020? And how do you think that Trump will fare in general with black voters in November?
Well, I think that's a really important question. Let me say this at the beginning. I remember being a kid in high school with people putting labels on me, whether I was an Oreo or someone who did not quite fit in. I want to say to the young people out there, don't ever let someone, just because they're smarter or more powerful or look wiser than you are, tell you what you can or cannot do. That is the kind of message we don't want to send to our young people, whether they're Republicans or Democrats, whether they're black or white, whether they're rich or poor. You have unlimited potential. As it relates to the African-American vote, will more vote for Republicans and President Trump this year? I think the answer is yes, they will. Does Vice President Biden's comments help? I think they do help sway more African-American voters to think logically about the choices at hand. And what he did was he once again reinforced this narrative that the Democrats are entitled to the black vote. I'm only asking the question why, and I'm happy to put the record that I have produced along with President Trump against the record of Vice President Biden. That would be a great comparison, and frankly, even the comments that I've heard from both individuals, that is something that's worth comparing as well.
Let's do it, Senator. Let's do it. Let's compare. I mean, because today you actually blasted Joe Biden's remarks, and you said that President Trump has done more for black people than any other president. So tell us what Trump has done for black people and give us the record of Joe Biden.
Thank you very much. Let's start with the 1994 crime bill. What Vice President Biden's support of the 1994 crime bill did was lock up more African-American men than any other crime bill in the last 50 years. What the First Step Act, the act that was supported by President Trump, I was a co-sponsor of it as well, we righted the wrongs done by Vice President Biden's support of the 1994 crime bill. We have had thousands of letters from people who have been justly sentenced and released because of the First Step Act. Let's just think about the Opportunity Zones legislation, bringing $75 billion into 8,700 of the poorest, most devastated communities around the country. $75 billion of private sector dollars coming in. Let's talk about the Opportunity Scholarship Fund in Washington, D.C., supported by Dianne Feinstein, Cory Booker, myself, Ron John, bringing in quality education. There is a 25,000 student waiting list for quality education, and these charter schools and opportunity scholarships provide more more resources, better education, so these kids can have a better future. Let's think about the Farm Bill. African-American farmers, up until this last Farm Bill, were not able, if they had heirs property, to access the Farm Credit Agency to allow them to borrow against that property. For the first time, that is now happening. Let's think of the comments of the head of the United Negro College Fund, who said under this administration, this is the highest level of funding for historically black colleges and universities ever. This is the first time those colleges have had permanent funding in the legislation. Let's think about sickle cell anemia, a disease that is 100%, basically speaking, impacting of African Americans, 100%. My legislation, signed by the president, has ushered in more research and more scrutiny to make sure that we make more progress. Think about the Department of Defense and their partnerships with historically black colleges and universities. The list is long, and I would love to say, let's take these list of accomplishments, compare it to, if you have a list, Lindsay, I'm happy to wait and listen to the list of Biden's accomplishments.
Well, I'm not here to defend on either side, but I will say that words matter, right? And this is a president that critics have said has a history of racist comments toward black people, from the Central Park Five to discrimination scandals at his properties. He basically launched his political career questioning the birthplace of the first black president. Trump has never apologized for any of that. Biden did essentially apologize today. So why are you willing to give President Trump a pass, but not the former vice president?
Well, actually, Lindsay, I think you and media are the ones giving the vice president the pass. You said essentially apologize. I am now looking for the definition of jest in the dictionary. I can't find it according to the current definition being used by media. He said
perhaps I was much too cavalier. I mean, I think that that's a bit of an apology, right?
Okay, well, Lindsay, let's talk about the definition of cavalier if you want to, or we can do something even better. Let's talk about what happened when President Trump said something that I found racially offensive as it relates to Charlottesville. He called me. I went into the Oval Office. We had a serious conversation about why I found those comments to be offensive. We sat there for over an hour discussing the issues of this nation, the issues of race. And then we came out of that. He said, Tim, at the end of the conversation we had, he says, Tim, help me help those I have offended. That's essentially an apology. And what did we do? We created opportunity zones that is now bringing more resources into the poorest communities in this nation. And let's compare that to what Joe Biden has said. Joe Biden said while he was in Iowa that poor kids can be just as smart as white kids. Is that to suggest that every single kid in America that's living in poverty, like the poverty I grew up in, has to be black? Is that suggesting that the high poverty rate in this nation is 100% black? Is that to suggest that folks needing assistance in this nation are all black? I don't know how to read into his comments. I'm going to take him at his word on that comment. I didn't blast him on that one. This one I did come out on. The comments he's made in the past, I didn't come out and talk about those comments. I gave him a pass. I make sure that I am consistent when Republicans say things I don't appreciate on racial lines. I speak out against it. When Democrats say things I don't appreciate, I speak out against it. What I don't hear from the Democrat leadership today are people speaking out against Vice President Biden's comments. I hear crickets. It's as quiet as a church mouse. That is hypocrisy. It is inconsistent, and it sends the wrong message to the young people of this nation that you have to stay in line or you're not black enough. The Kamala Harris said something today that the comments were painful, that she's heard for too long, too many people telling her how she's supposed to talk, where she's supposed to live. That is the kind of, those are the kind of comments that I respect and appreciate. Where's the rest of the folks coming out, not condemning the vice president, but at least condemning his comments? If we want a more just society, it requires us to call on the carpet those on our side first. And that's exactly what I did with Charlottesville. I did it in Maryland. I did it with AOC. I did it with the squad. I don't see that kind of leadership on the left, and they get a pass. It's like whitewashing what the vice president says because people are so incensed with President Trump that they're willing to let everything go by in order to try to help support Vice President Biden.
Okay, let me ask you this. In 2016, Trump described himself to the Washington Post as the least racist person that you've ever encountered. You know President Trump personally. Would you describe him that way?
Well, I will say this. There's no doubt that when I take a look, I think I'm the least racist person I've ever met in my entire life, by the way. But the reality of it is this. When I think about all the things I've been able to accomplish with the guy that so many people say is racist or racially offensive, every time I bring a piece of legislation that helps the African American community specifically, including the CARES Act, where we put $1 billion in for HBCUs, where I personally fought for funding minority business development agencies, $10 million so that we could market within the minority communities, more assistance from the Paycheck Protection Program. You know, the president said, absolutely. So here's what I'm suggesting.
But is he the least racist person that you've ever encountered?
It's not Republicans or Democrats that are actually racially offensive. It comes from the American heart. It comes from the global heart. It's not black people or white people or Republicans or Democrats. It's simply that if you have hatred in your heart, it manifests. We should fight against it wherever we find it. And America has come so far in such a short period of time that we got to celebrate that. I'm sorry, Lindsay, I didn't hear your comment.
Well, actually, I want to switch gears now. Move to the coronavirus. Just last question to you. The president delegated you and Secretary Carson to lead a council to support underserved communities impacted by the virus. That was on April 22nd, 28 days ago. What has the council accomplished during that time, and what further action will the administration be taking?
Well, thank you very much. That's a great question. Dr. Francis Collins at NIH has been working on something called the RADx Up project, which provides more testing and more resources in the underserved communities. It's going to be a part of the more significant Shark Tank approach he's taken to finding more treatments and therapies. It's a great project. I spoke with Dr. Jerome Adams, our Surgeon General, just yesterday about the hundreds of millions of dollars that we are have already sent to the federally qualified health centers, thousands around the nation, to make sure that the resources are there. We're increasing the number of free tests. We provided over $100 billion to hospitals and healthcare givers so that when you are uninsured or underinsured, that you have the access not only to the tests, but also to the treatment so that you get what you need in response to that. We've also, I've asked for, and I think we'll see the funding for more telemedicine because, Lindsay, as you know, sometimes if you live in the rural parts of our country, it's hard to find a doctor, it's hard to find a specialist. What we're going to be able to do with the magic of technology is to connect the best doctors with the patients that need it the most. And I'm also encouraging the White House and the administration to push forward on broadband because the issue of connectivity isn't simply a medical issue. It's a healthcare priority. It's actually a learning priority. And frankly, in the future, it will be a requirement for the future of work, the gig economy. And so these are the priorities. I've seen funding for testing. I've seen more funding for telemedicine. I've also seen more funding for my Paycheck Protection Program that I was a part of designing it. And we still have about $100 billion. I asked Secretary Mnuchin to also put more targets on the back of smaller institutions, MSIs, minority serving institutions,
Senator
so
Scott,
that we get more of those resources. Yes, ma'am.
I apologize for cutting you off and just running short on time. We appreciate you spending the time with us on the show.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC